Channel 4's coverage of Election Day 1990.
We now join our regularly scheduled program, already in progress.
They are quirky and a little cranky tonight. Taxes and the economy have proved to be some traps for Republicans and Democrats alike. As for President Bush, as he looks ahead to 1992 and his re-election, well, there are some developments out there tonight that will make him a little nervous. Let's begin now with some results, starting with the governor's races. In Florida, a big and important state in the Southwest, where the president, Southeast, where the president spent a lot of time. Lawton Chiles replaces Bob Martinez, who was the Republican incumbent. 25 electoral votes for 1992 there. In Kansas, Joan Finney is the upset winner over Republican incumbent Mike Hayden. Probably a little tax revolt going on in the state of Kansas. In New York, Mario Cuomo, who's been looking at 1992, re-elected tonight, and the conservative ran second. The Republican Party is dead on arrival this night in the state of New York. In Connecticut, Lowell Weicker ran as an independent for governor, our projected winner in the state of Connecticut tonight. In Rhode Island, a new governor, Bruce Sunland, a former broadcast executive, he defeats the Republican incumbent, Pete DePrett. Now, there are some races around the country that are simply too close to call as well, including one that we've been talking about now almost every day for several months. Clady and the Lady, as they characterized it in the state of Texas. Clayton Williams for the Republicans and Ann Richards for the Democrats. Here is the raw vote with about 1/3 of it counted so far. Richards has a very narrow lead, but that is still too close to call the state of Texas. And Richards has been characterized as being tougher than a $2 steak, and Clayton Williams, of course, had large ears, a large fortune, and a mouth large enough to get both feet into, cowboy boots and all. In the state of Massachusetts, Democrat maverick John Silber against Republican outsider Bill Weld. As you can see, just 4 points between them now, with about 30% of the vote counted. Still too close to call because there are some important tabulations that we still have to make in Massachusetts tonight. We're doing all of this in something called the Voter Research Survey. The networks have pooled their efforts and they're making a common analysis. And when we say a projection, we're talking, first of all, about all the networks and how they take a look at this. In the race for Senate around the country, in Iowa, Tom Harkin, the first Democrat re-elected to the United States Senate from that state, defeating Tom Tauke, who gave him a very tough race, and also Tauke had some assistance from President Bush, but to no avail. In Massachusetts, John Kerry, well, we'll go to Illinois. Let's go to Illinois and Paul Simon. Challenge from Lynn Martin, the Republican member of Congress. Paul Simon, however, goes back for a second term, the former Democratic presidential candidate. In Michigan, Carl Levin. In Massachusetts, my fault, John Kerry goes back to the United States Senate for a second term. In Michigan, Carl Levin, Democrat, re-elected. In Alabama, Howell Heflin, re-elected, Democrat. In Maine, Republican William Cohn, the number 2 man on the Senate Intelligence Committee, re-elected. And in Rhode Island, Senator Claiborne Pell, who said at one time when he was asked what he'd introduced recently, he said, well, I can't remember very much, but re-elected nonetheless by the people of Rhode Island. A strong challenge from Claudine Schneider fell well short. Claiborne Pell was once asked by someone why the people of that state keep sending him back to the United States Senate, and he said, well, basically, they're very sweet. So, John Chancellor, who's going to be with me here all night long, taking a look at the trends and doing the analysis for us as well.
I think Saddam Hussein didn't hurt Senator Pell.
No, that's right. When you're the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, your state does not want to turn you out. What are we seeing in the House of Representatives?
We have a projection now with a little bit of an error factor, but we now project that the Democrats will gain 8 seats in the U.S. House. That'll give them 266 seats if this projection is accurate. It has an error factor of 4. That'll narrow. And that will mean, Tom, as you well know, it will be easier for the Democrats to overturn presidential vetoes and more difficult for George Bush to govern.
All right, John, we have a call now in the state of North Carolina. The whole country was looking in on this one. In North Carolina, the projected winner is Jesse Helms. He goes back to the United States Senate. That is our projection. He had a very dramatic challenge, of course, from Harvey Gantt, who was the former mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, wanted to be the first black Democratic senator ever. But Jesse Helms hangs on to win in a very bitter, indeed, a raw battle in the state of North Carolina tonight. Standing by at Gantt headquarters now is NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea?
Tom, this has really been a heartbreaking race. Gant is not down yet. In fact, he was out campaigning until just a few moments ago. That because the polls broke down in several key precincts in Durham. So he went from precinct to precinct until about 9:30 this evening on the East Coast time, trying to get that vote out. What happened in this race is probably that he didn't get enough of the white vote, and we're still not sure how big the black turnout was. But as you can hear, there's some cheers here in Gant headquarters because they're beginning to hear certain counties coming in. But as we have just projected, it is not enough to carry this race for Harvey Gant. What happened here was a very strong racial message from Jesse Helms in the closing 10 days of the race, and it focused on something that we've found previously in Louisiana with the David Duke campaign. It's a very strong message. The job quota issue. This, with a weakening economy, had a very strong appeal to white voters here in North Carolina. One thing that we did see, big gender gap. Gant did very well with women, not a big surprise because he is pro-choice. Helms did better with men. We've also seen, and this is significant for the future of the South, that Helms did not do as well as Gant by 2-1. Gant did better with people who had moved into the state in the last 10 years. Tom?
Henry, what's the belief there in the Gant campaign headquarters? In the early polling, he was ahead, of course, but there was some belief that a lot of white voters were saying that to pollsters, but they were secretly going to vote for Jesse Helms. Was that always an obstacle for him?
That is, as we've seen that there is an underreporting and inaccuracy in polling, and none of us really believed that polling. The Gant people didn't either. What they needed was a very big black turnout and to pull 40% of the white vote, and we don't think that they got that crucial mathematical combination.
All right, thank you very much. Andrea Mitchell at the campaign headquarters of Harvey Gant tonight, who put up a valiant contest against Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms has a kind of national constituency that he can tap for a lot of money, and he did so. We have a call now in the state of New Jersey, a surprisingly close election down there tonight. But our projected winner is Dollar Bill Bradley, who spent a lot of them, more than $10 million. Christine Whitman was his Republican challenger. She only spent about $450,000. And yet, Bradley barely squeaked through in New Jersey tonight. John Chancellor, he may have been the victim of what we have been calling the Florio factor. The governor of the state of New Jersey raised taxes after promising that he would not, and Christine Whitman went right after him on that one.
Our surveys show, Tom, that about 80% of the voters who talked to our pollsters today disapproved of Florio's handling of the finances and of the state, and a large number of those voted for Christine Whitman. So her $400,000 to his $10.5 million really was well spent. I have one other fascinating thing. Would you believe that Newt Gingrich is in trouble? With 37% of the vote in Georgia's 6th district, the whip for the Republican Party, the rebel of the Republican Party, Newt Gingrich, is about 50-50 with a young fellow named David Worley. And do you know why Mr. Worley is doing so well? He says Newt Gingrich has got too big for his britches. He's become a national politician, and he's ignoring the 6th district in Georgia. Fascinating.
I wonder what they'll be saying at Butch's Cafe in Newt Gingrich's district tomorrow morning. Well, about old Newt, we got your attention on that one just a little bit. So the situation is tonight that the Democrats have been picking up some state houses around the country, and they have been losing a few as well, but not nearly as many as they've been picking up. And Bill Bradley has, of course, now he is our projected winner, but the big question is, how much does this damage him in 1992 when he was taking a hard look at the presidential race? He'd raised $12 million altogether, spent 10 in New Jersey, and barely won. In Florida, we want to show you now the raw vote tonight as we have it. Martinez and Childs were in a very spirited race down there. Lawton Childs had gotten out of the United States Senate saying he was burned out. He'd suffered from depression. He was taking some pills, some drugs. Martinez went after him hard on that. Martinez had been a disaster in the eyes of many people in Florida in his first term, and he loses, as you can see, by a pretty sizable margin. Only half the vote has been counted so far, but Childs is our projected winner in Florida tonight. 25 electoral votes for 1992 down there, and NBC's Robert Kerr tonight is at Lawton Childs headquarters. Bob?
Tom, this is one of those big state house wins in the South for the Democrats. The Democrats in this room here have a special reason to celebrate, not only for Lawton Childs, who has won, but because the Democrats in this state have scored a major victory in a state that's been leaning more and more Republican. Childs apparently had it all over incumbent Governor Bob Martinez. Childs, as you mentioned, a U.S. Senator for 18 years. He was seen by voters here as a comfortable old shoe, a very familiar person, a friendly one. whose honesty came through and his experience came through today and got voters to vote for him on those grounds above all others. Voters flat out, it seems, did not like Bob Martinez. He raised taxes soon after he said he wouldn't. They didn't like that. He tried to restrict abortion. Voters here did not like that, although that was not a major consideration in this race. And they also said they did not like Martinez's personality. Not long ago, Governor-elect Childs, came in here to give his acceptance speech and to thank everybody, and he brought back a theme that was prominent during the administration of President John F. Kennedy in the 60s.
I've got it. The fever, the Camelot fever, and I hope you have. I know you do. And I think we're going to really, really begin to work on this state, and we're going to start that tomorrow. And God bless you, and thank you for everything you did, and keep on helping us.
Tom Childs' campaign was far different from the campaign waged by his opponent. What we've learned here is that a candidate won by limiting contributions to $100 per donor. We also learned that voters were apparently willing to overlook Childs' bouts with depression, the bouts you alluded to earlier tonight, and his use of the drug Prozac to combat that depression. We also learned, Tom, that the negative ads that figured so prominently in this campaign backfired on incumbent Governor Martinez. This state had one of the most aggressive press corps in rooting out all the distortions and misstatements in the ads, and they came back to haunt Bob Martinez. Also, Tom, you mentioned that Childs had walked away from a long career, 18 years in the U.S. Senate, citing burnout, citing the fact that he was frustrated over not being able to get a handle on the budget deficit. Well, apparently what's happened in this state may be that voters were willing to say that reflected some good sense walking away from the Senate in frustration. Tom?
Thank you very much, Bob Kerr. And we think as well down there in Florida that abortion may have been an issue because Lawton Childs is someone who can be described as being in favor of abortion rights. Bob Martinez is a very strong anti-abortion political candidate, and that was one of the many other issues that separated the two of them as well. We have some other winners and losers for you tonight. Projected winner, the United States Senate from the state of Montana, Democrat Max Baucus. He won handily in that state. In Iowa, in the race for governor, Republican Terry Branstad going back to the state house. An interesting split in Iowa. Branstad is anti-abortion, and the winner in the Senate race, Tom Harkin, is for abortion rights. In Vermont, this is in Idaho, first of all, Cecil Andrus has been the governor of that state for most of the 20th century. It's a very conservative state, but he's a very popular Democrat populist. Cecil Andrus going back to the state house in Idaho. You'll recall that he was the Secretary of the Interior under Jimmy Carter. And in Vermont, Bernard Sanders in the House of Representatives will be Vermont's only congressman. He's listed as an independent, but he's a small s socialist. He's the first socialist in the House since just after World War II. Peter Smith, who was the Republican representative in the House of Representatives from the state of Vermont, what happened to him then was that he had President Bush come and campaign for him, and he stood at the podium and said that there were many differences between himself and the president. So he was scrambling for his life, and in fact, politically tonight, he lost it to Bernard Sanders. So that's the situation in the House of Representatives. And now, we'll be back right after these local messages.
Who else could do it? Who else could give you meats this light with all the delicious flavor of the South? Only Bryan. Introducing Bryan Light. 85% fat-free. A whole assortment of plump, juicy hot dogs, great-tasting bologna, and tender sausages that are all 85% fat-free. You see, Bryan just trimmed the fat, not the flavor. New Bryan Light, 85% fat-free, with all the flavor of the South.
We went to the Kroger here in Columbia yesterday afternoon, and at Kroger we spent about $55, whereas if we had shopped here at the Food Line, we'd only spent $48. We could have saved $7.
In Columbia, people really like the new Food Lion store.
Number one is the low prices. Number two, the cleanliness of the store. It's one of the cleanest grocery stores that I've seen. Plus the the staff, the employees here is super friendly, and it's just a really nice place to shop.
Introducing Snickers Snackers, because sometimes a little satisfaction is all you need.
Who cares if you give to United Way? A lonely child cares. Through United Way agencies, kids like Adrian find friendships that make a real difference. Please give.
Help salute the Mid-South's environmental heroes.
We're back with Campaign Night 1990. We'll tell you that in Minnesota, the race between Paul Wellstone and Rudy Boschwitz is still too close to call. They've had an X-rated campaign in Minnesota so far this year. For all that talk about Lake Woebegone, what they've had is a Republican candidate for governor, or rather for the Senate, who had to drop out for governor. But he had to drop out because he was accused of skinny dipping with teenagers. He also had a couple of affairs. And we had somebody who was running for the United States House of Representatives who charged a lot of personal phone calls to a female lobbyist. Winners and losers, some more of them for you right now. North Carolina, we have called Jesse Helms re-elected in North Carolina against Harvey Gantt. In the race for senator from New Jersey, Bill Bradley, in a very close race in New Jersey. He is our projected winner. Re-elected, he'll have to take a much closer look now at 1992. In Illinois, Paul Simon gets a second term. Strong challenge from Lynn Martin, but she fell well short. She just didn't have the money power when the time was crucial. In Alabama, Howell Heflin, Democrat, re-elected to the United States Senate. In Rhode Island, Claiborne Pell, who is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a man who is described even by his admirers in that state as a kind of a lovable old fuddy-duddy. He got a strong challenge from Claudine Schneider, but he won. And in Indiana, Dan Coates, who took over the Senate seat vacated by Dan Quayle when he became vice president, re-elected, Republican from Indiana. In Iowa, Tom Harkin, first Democrat ever re-elected to the United States Senate from the state of Iowa. He was described as a barracuda in populist clothing. He said that with Tom talkie, the only two things that they agreed on were daylight savings time. We're going to show you what's going on now in some of the governor's races around the country as well. In New Mexico, Bruce King gets to go back to the State House. He's been there before. Elected governor of New Mexico. Bruce King, a boisterous rancher out there. George Voinovich, who was the mayor of Cleveland for 10 years, now the new Republican governor of Ohio. That's a pickup for the Republicans because that seat had been held by Richard Celeste, who had been a Democrat in the state of Ohio before he retired. Joan Finney, the surprise winner, 65-year-old state treasurer in Kansas, she defeats the Republican incumbent Mike Hayden. He'd had a lot of trouble with taxes in Kansas. And right next door in the state of Nebraska, the Republican woman governor of that state, Kay Orr, is in a very tight race tonight as well. We want to go now down to Washington, where the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Mr. Ron Brown, is standing by on your right. Ed Rollins, who is running the congressional re-election campaigns for the Republicans, is on your left. Mr. Rollins, we'll begin with you if we can. It looks like the Democrats could pick up as many as 7 seats. That means that they'll have a margin of anywhere from, 89, 90, 91 over the Republicans. You wouldn't like to be running the president's legislative campaign in the next couple of years with those kind of numbers staring you in the face, would you?
Well, obviously, any losses from the numbers we have today make it just that much more difficult. But I think the night is early, and obviously there's some key races in the West Coast, some in Oregon, some in California. I think we just have to wait to see what the final results are.
But even in the West Coast, it looked like the Republicans who were up out there were endangered species. Take Denny Smith, for example, in the state of Oregon. He could very well lose that seat. The fact of the matter is, worst case scenario, Democrats will hold this margin, but they'll probably build on it. It'll be tough for the president in the next couple of years.
Well, there's no question. He'll have to have a little more aggressive strategy, and obviously may have to go to a veto strategy, which certainly he has sufficient numbers to sustain vetoes.
All right, Ron Brown, there was a lot of talk before this election that the Democrats would have a very big evening. That is not developing. You saw what happened to Bill Bradley in New Jersey, a very tight race there. You've got a Democratic governor in Michigan who seems to be in some trouble tonight, still too close to call. Isn't it fair to say that the country is not saying we want Democrats instead of Republicans, that they're just picking off these candidates one by one?
Tom, I don't know what results you're looking at. I think it's going to be a very big evening for Democrats. We're going to gain in every single category. I think we're going to do better than the 7 number you were talking about in the House. We're running very strong races for governor and very strong in the United States Senate. To me, it looks like a real Democratic year. I mean, I'm glad to be sitting in my seat rather than Ed's tonight, I must say.
And what happens in 1992 as you look across this political landscape? Where are your strengths at the moment?
Well, it's clear that we've got strength across this country. I think the western region of the country is a real land of opportunity for the Democratic Party. We're going to control the state houses in almost all of those western states now. If you had predicted that 5 years ago, people would have said you're crazy. I think we're going to increase our margin in the United States Senate. I think that the voters of this country spoke, and I think Democrats listened. I think they said that contrary to President Bush's disinterest in domestic policy, we know that voters are very interested in domestic policy. They're interested in education and housing, and they're interested in jobs. They're interested in economic growth. Yeah. And Democrats spoke to those issues. I think that's why we're doing so well tonight.
All right, Ron Brown and Ed Rollins will be coming back to you later in the program. Of course, we want to go to John Chancellor now and talk about that for just a moment. Mr. Brown putting up a very brave front, but the fact of the matter is we still have a race too close to call in California, too close to call in Texas. If they pick up those 2 states, the Democrats,
Eddie Rollins is one of the, as you well know, is one of the smartest politicians in the United States. And he said recently, or at least was quoted as saying, that losing 8 or 10 seats in the House and any in the Senate would be a disaster for the Republican Party. Well, our projection is that they may lose on that magnitude with some of these very close races in the Senate. But going on, Tom, one other interesting thing we have found, this is not a year absent of messages. The SNL scandal has affected the so-called Keating Five in a very big way. These 5 senators have been involved in one way or another, some not so much, others far more, with Charles Keating and the failed SNL that he ran. We asked voters in their home states how they felt about them, should they run again. Running again loses for every one of the Keating Five. And when we asked, do you think they shouldn't run or they should resign now? Alan Cranston, 67% in California say he should resign now or not run. DeConcini, 65% say that. Don Riegel, 60% say that. Then you get down to John Glenn and John McCain, and it's less. But that's really severe stuff when 2 years before you have to run, a majority, 2 out of 3 in Cranston's case, say, no, we don't want you in there.
I think that that's the one issue that the American voter really understands and hates most of all, spending all that money to bail out people who seem to be living well elsewhere, and all those senators and congressmen were taking some of the proceeds.
Yeah, absolutely.
We still can't say what the voter turnout was on this day, but in the state of Alaska, they're offering the village that has the greatest voter turnout a plane load of turkeys. Why, I'm not sure. We'll be back later.
Spend a little time with you.
Exclusive interviews.
Tom Brokaw from NBC.
Wherever news breaks.
Aid for the Soviet Union.
To achieve what?
Whatever it takes.
Stay with all my people. He promises to answer you.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Just conclusion.
That cough sounds bad.
When her littlest patient is coughing, it's the biggest thing on Mom's mind. So now there's new Robitussin Pediatric Cough Suppressant, formulated just for kids. The long-lasting cough medicine with a great cherry taste. From the brand more doctors and pharmacists recommend. And since Robitussin Pediatric gives such effective cough relief, both the patient and the doctor can rest comfortably. New Robitussin Pediatric Cough Suppressant, recommended by Dr. Mom.
From the folks who brought you the $1 Million Money Grab, now it's the great Channel 4 Grocery Grab.
Grab steaks, grab coffee, grab frozen foods, and pies, even dog food.
And it's free. 4 winners daily. Just send your name, address, and phone number. Then if you see your name on Oprah or Wheel of Fortune, call and win 60 seconds to fill your cart and compete for the grand prize, a trip to Days of Our Lives. It's the great Channel 4 Grocery Grab.
I'm Demetria Kaladimos, and I'm for the family.
Good evening. I'm Mary Alice Williams. The latest on Decision 90. In that expensive, contentious North Carolina Senate race, Senator Jesse Helms, the champion of the New Right conservative movement, has beat black Democrat Harvey Gantt, the most formidable challenger Helms has ever faced. In New Jersey, Democratic Senator Dollar Bill Bradley, popular, powerful, presidential caliber, has just survived the scare of his life, beating Christine Todd Whitman. That raised a referendum on Democratic Governor Jim Florio, who just pushed on the people of New Jersey one whopper of a tax raise. In Minnesota, Republican Senator Rudy Boschwitz just hanging on in the face of a challenge from Professor Paul Wellstone. Georgia Republican Newt Gingrich, the maverick who battled the party line during the budget process and incurred the wrath of President Bush, now battling David Worley in a very tight race. And in the Massachusetts governor's race, voter anger was given voice in the person of Democrat John Silber. William Weld is leading. He could pull it off. Now, Lisa Myers, if there's so much anger out there, why are so few House and Senate incumbents losing?
Mary Alice, what you're seeing happen tonight is that this exceptional public anger has hit an invincible wall of political money, which protects most incumbents from the voters. The fact is that on a congressional level, we do not have real elections anymore. Incumbents raise so much money and challengers so little that there are very few real contests. In 1990, 86% of House incumbents and 50% of senators either had no opponent at all or had an opponent so miserably underfinanced they didn't have a prayer.
What's the role of the PACs in this?
Well, much of this money is coming from special interests. Look at the House side. House incumbents overall had a 9-to-1 fundraising advantage over their challengers. However, among special interest political action committees, they had a 19-to-1 advantage, and that really tells it all. The system is rigged.
You know, this even filters down to the state legislative level, where of 6,100 legislative seats up, 5,600 incumbents are virtual shoo-ins tonight.
Well, the fact is that it's very tough to be a challenger anymore, and as a result, a lot of people don't run. You cannot beat somebody with nobody, and a lot of nobodies are who runs for Congress these days.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. And now we're going to go to John Cochran at the White House. John, is this a referendum, this election night, on President Bush?
Well, not if you believe the president's age. They, even at the start of the polls today, were saying, including the White House Chief of Staff, John Sununu, this is not a referendum on George Bush, that George Bush's name was not on any ballot today. So you'll be hearing that more and more in the days to come. As to whether or not this election is good or bad for George Bush, it's hard to say that he was mortally wounded, or certainly that it's been a great victory. None of the above, I would say. For example, let's take some of the people he campaigned for. Take a Congressman, Peter Smith, up in Vermont, who lost tonight. Peter Smith voted for the president's tax package, that is to say his budget package, but Vermonters have defeated him by electing a socialist. Now, socialists normally would vote for higher taxes, higher spending, so I don't know that this is, you can say this is a referendum on George Bush and his tax package, and you can go down a list of races here where George Bush has campaigned for people. Some of them won, some of them lost. It's a very mixed bag, Mary Alice.
But George Bush did appear on behalf of Bob Martinez, the incumbent governor of Florida, who lost. He did appear for the last 3 days on behalf of Clayton Williams in Texas, and Clayton's still hanging on, but in a very tight race.
But you know, if you look at these races, it's hard to say that George Bush had any impact. Martinez had other problems. He had gone for a tax package. He had had troubles on the abortion issue. Clayton Williams is having trouble with women voters in Texas. That's probably not George Bush's fault. By the same token, George Bush campaigned for Jesse Helms, and I don't think that anyone believes that Jesse Helms is winning tonight because George Bush went down and campaigned for him in Raleigh. Mary Alice.
John, do you foresee some action coming out of the White House in terms of a shakeup either in the White House staff or in the Republican National Committee in the coming days?
Well, everybody seems to think Ed Rollins, of course, is going, and I'm not sure if Ed has announced that he's going to be departing, and there's going to be some questions as to whether or not there'll be some other changes down there. Here in the White House, we're not expecting any major shakeups at all, certainly not among the top-level people like Dick Darman or John Sununu.
Okay, thank you very much, John Cochran at the White House. And parenthetically, Ed Rollins has said that he wants to open a bar and not allow anyone in who wants to talk politics. We'll ask him about that later. More on Decision 90 later. I'm Mary Alice Williams.
Decision 90 continues. From NBC News Election Headquarters, here again is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening, and to bring you right up to date, it does appear that the Democrats will gain another 8 seats in the House of Representatives. That means that their margin over the Republicans could be a full 90 or 91 votes altogether. No changes so far tonight in the United States Senate, but Democrats are doing well in the races for governor around the country. They have picked up, at the moment, 5 Republican seats, while the Republicans have only picked up 2 from the Democrats thus far. One of the most exciting races for governor in the country, of course, has been in the state of Texas. We want to show you now the vote as it has been tabulated so far. They're now moving at about 50% of the vote counted. As you can see, Ann Richards, who is the Democratic state treasurer, running against Clayton Williams, has a small lead, but it is still too close to call in Texas. Now, that race has been described as being between Clady and the Lady. In Massachusetts, another race simply too close to call between maverick Democrat John Silber, who is on leave as president of Boston University, and William Weld, who served in the Justice Department in the Reagan administration but left in a difference over the policy and the pursuit of justice. As you can see, the race there very close indeed, with just over a third of the vote counted so far. Catherine Couric has been following that race in Massachusetts. Katie, Mike Barnacle, who's a popular columnist in the Boston Globe, said that the problem with John Silber may be that his shelf life ran out on him. What about that? Did he lose it in the closing days, if in fact he loses tonight?
Well, that might be a very astute comment, Tom, because just last week, John Silber might have made one Silber shocker too many. All along, he's been offending some traditional Democratic groups, the elderly, blacks, Jews. But last week, he offended working mothers. He said many of them who work really don't need to. And he said basically that they think a third-rate daycare center is as good as a first-rate home. So there's some thinking here tonight that he might have alienated too many women, not only liberal Democrats, but moderate as well, and it might have cost him dearly.
But the interesting thing is in Massachusetts that John Silber was against the idea of rolling back taxes in that state. Mike Dukakis, of course, who's the outgoing governor, is in a lot of trouble over the state of the economy. And a proposal on the ballot to roll back the taxes in Massachusetts has gone down to defeat significantly.
Well, that's right, Tom. That's question 3. It would roll back taxes to the 1988 rate. And William Weld supported that, and some thought that his embracing that question 3 would ultimately hurt him. But apparently some voters in Massachusetts tonight voted no to question 3 and yes to William Weld. So it's yet to be seen just how much his support of that issue is going to help or hurt him.
All right, thank you very much. Catherine Couric tonight at the Massachusetts headquarters, where we're taking a look at that very close race between William Weld and John Silber. John Silber has said very often that he has been misinterpreted by the media, and he blamed them for a lot of his national image problems based on his comments about the Jewish people, for example, whether or not he would campaign in black neighborhoods. He tried to put that all in the proper perspective in the closing days of the campaign. We have some more projected winners for you that we want to show you tonight. Polls still open in some parts of the country, especially in the far west. This race was settled early, however, and decisively for Lawton Childs, who limited his campaign contributions to $100, and he defeated the Republican incumbent, Robert Martinez. In Kansas, the Republican incumbent, Mike Hayden, had a real problem with a tax revolt, and Joan Finney, the 65-year-old state treasurer, was the unexpected winner of the Democratic primary and then went on to win the general, our projected winner there tonight. By the way, she is very outspoken against abortion. In Colorado, no surprise here, Governor Romer has been very popular, and he is our projected winner for a second term in the state of Colorado tonight. In Rhode Island, a new face on the political scene in that state, Bruce Sunderland, who's run for the governor's office before, this time successfully. 65-year-old retired broadcasting executive, Democrat, our projected winner, beating the incumbent governor, DePrette. Now, let's take a look at the United States Senate. As we have said earlier tonight, no changes thus far. John Kerry, midway through his campaign, seemed to be in trouble against John Rappaport, who had a lot of money to spend on that campaign and did, but Kerry goes back to the United States Senate. He is someone who probably has national aspirations, a Vietnam hero. In Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, despite a 2-to-1 Democratic edge for the Democrats, Mitch McConnell, the projected winner for re-election. He had a very strong challenge from former Louisville Mayor Harvey Sloan, but Mr. Sloan came up just short. Mitch McConnell, the winner in Kentucky tonight. In Tennessee, Al Gore, although we don't think that he'll run for president again in 1992, he's young enough to reserve his options for some time in the future. He is our projected winner in Tennessee tonight. In Texas, Phil Gramm of the Gramm-Rudman Law on rewriting the United States budget so that they can begin to get into some kind of deficit alignment. Well, Phil Gramm, one of the most outspoken and conservative and colorful U.S. senators reelected. In Kansas, the soft-spoken Nancy Kassebaum, daughter of Alf Landon, who was the Republican presidential candidate against FDR, Nancy Kassebaum, our projected winner in the state of Kansas. So that's not good news for the Republicans as well, because going into this race, in fact, the Democrats had a majority in the United States Senate of 55-45, and then if they pick up seats as well in the House of Representatives, what we saw in the closing days of that budget battle in George Bush's difficulties will only be expanded in the next 2 years.
It will indeed, and it looks as though it's going to be a little bit that way in the House as well. A little more difficult for Bush as he approaches 92 and he wants to run again. I've been looking, Tom, at some of the money figures here about the incumbents, thinking about Jesse Helms. Incumbents running for the U.S. Senate this year outspent the challengers 3-1, according to Common Cause. Enormous amounts of money, $99 million spent by incumbents to defend their seats, $34 million spent by their challengers. And when you think about the most expensive race for federal office that we had this year, it is Jesse Helms against Harvey Gantt. Jesse Helms raising almost $13 million, Gantt raising $5.5 million. And what is interesting, it's not illegal, but it is kind of puzzling, Tom. 65 or 70% of that money came from out of North Carolina. It was raised all over the country and went in there. And it's a fascinating race to examine because hardly anybody, as we all know, had heard of Harvey Gantt until all this began outside the state. And everybody in the country had heard of Jesse Helms, and yet Harvey Gantt gave Jesse Helms the scare of his life. And it... very interesting.
Very close.
Helms won all the men. He won the voters over 45. Gantt won the younger people. People who are optimistic about the future of the United States voted for Jesse Helms. People who were pessimistic about the future voted for Gantt.
$21 million was spent on the Texas governor's race. We were just taking a look at that. Fort Stockton, the hometown of Clayton Williams, who's the Republican candidate, they run their whole school system for $15 million, so he could have written a check for that as well. By the way, when he played high school football, Clayton Williams said we were 5-5. We lost 5 on the road and lost 5 at home. We'll be back after this local message.
Is it my imagination, or is the mudslinging worse this election year?
It's going to be a long, slow recovery, but because you're not getting the workers' compensation you deserve, the most painful part will be paying the bills. Who can you turn to for help? Call the law office of Bart Durham. We've got the legal experience and the know-how to help you get the money you deserve to pay the doctor's bills, the mortgage, to buy food for your family. The law office of Bart Durham. Call us. Our fees come from money we collect for you. The law office of Bart Durham. Give us a call.
Does this site look familiar? Can you relate to this? Being able to take it easy is what we all work so hard for. American Home Design will make it so easy for you that you can't afford not to call. Now's the time to replace your old windows with American Home Design's beautiful energy-saving, low E-glass windows. Cleaning is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Paint, putty, and storm windows will be a thing of the past. American Home Design manufactures all types of windows and doors and will give your home a brand new face with siding and custom trim that never needs painting. If you call today, you can take advantage of this special offer.
You've asked for lower prices. You've got it. Due to a special truckload purchase, we're offering our lowest prices ever. Call now while supplies last.
And who says there are no more bargains? We guarantee our prices to be equal to or lower than the competition for 30 days. I'm Paul Eel saying make it easy on yourself. Call American Home Design for a free estimate today.
We're back with Election Night 1990. We have a projected call for you in the state of South Dakota tonight. No real surprise there. The Republican incumbent was Larry Pressler, running for his 3rd term, and he is our projected winner tonight against Ted Munster, who was the Democratic candidate. Gave him a surprisingly strong challenge in terms of raising money and getting the enthusiasm and the enthusiastic backing of the Democrats nationally, but falling short tonight in the state of South Dakota. Larry Pressler. I want to show you what's going on in the House of Representatives tonight. Of course, all 435 seats are at stake, and the Democrats had a margin over the Republicans of about 80 seats altogether going into tonight. There you can see that that's what we have so far. The Republicans will have at least 56 seats, the Democrats 90. We think they'll pick up 7, but there are still 288 out there undecided. The number you want to keep your eye on is that blue one, plus 7, because that's our projected gain for the Democrats in the House of Representatives. Most of the seats still undecided, but based on the pattern that we're seeing in our voter survey across the country that all networks are participating in, we think that the Democrats will pick up 7 seats, which means, John, that they would have a margin of about 90 votes. John Cochran is at the White House right now. 90 votes would not be easy for the White House to overcome as they go to Capitol Hill looking for a George Bush agenda going into 1992.
Well, that's right, Tom. Looking even more closely at the Senate there, that's where it's really been close in terms of sustaining the president's veto. On the civil rights bill, for example, the president got 34 votes. He had to have 34 votes to have that veto sustained. The White House had another couple in its hip pocket they said they could call on, but it's very close in the Senate.
And, John, what are you hearing from inside the White House at this hour about what's going on in those governor's races around the country? They've lost Florida. Ann Richards may win in Texas. That is not yet resolved. And they must be hoping against great hope that Pete Wilson, the Republican, is going to win in California.
And they do think Pete Wilson is going to win. That's based on their own private polling. We're not hearing anything from the president. He's watching on television tonight. And if he wants to come to the window and let us know what he thinks, we'll be glad to pass it along. I think he's probably having a better night than some people predicted last week. This is not a disaster. This is not a mortal blow to George Bush, I don't believe. And, of course, the White House, of course, is going to play the game of saying the president's name was not on any ballot today, Tom.
Thank you very much, John Cochran. In fact, there are some offsetting patterns here. The Democrats won in Florida, but the Republicans gained the state house in the state of Ohio, a Midwestern powerhouse. And Governor Blanchard, a Democrat in the state of Michigan running for a 3rd term, is in a very tight race there tonight. But the big race around the country, to be resolved in the Southwest at least, is in the state of Texas. Ann Richards and Clayton Williams. We have some more of that vote for you now. About half of it has been counted so far. Ann Richards clings to a narrow lead, but we cannot, based on the patterns that we were seeing so far, we cannot make a projection on who will win the race for governor of Texas tonight. But that's a race that has gotten national attention, and George Bush moved in there on Saturday and just stayed at Clayton Williams' side for the entire time. And it would not be good for the president to lose the race in Texas, which he calls his home state, of course. It is where he votes, after all, and it's where he began life after Yale. Jim Cummins is in Texas tonight at the headquarters of Ann Richards. What are they thinking down there? A little nervousness, Jim?
Tom, we're just talking to Bill Pryor, the press secretary for Ann Richards, and he says she's confident that she's got this one wrapped up. They think that Clayton Williams lost this election by doing 2 things. You might recall about 3 weeks ago, he refused to shake her hand, and he called her a liar. And then last weekend, inexplicably, he announced that he didn't pay any income taxes in 1986. And as you know, he's a multimillionaire. He lost a lot of money in oil in 1986. But the Richards camp believes those are the 2 things that turned it in her favor.
And, Jim, he once said, "I am Bubba," referring to the Texas male vote, the guy with the shotgun or the rifle in the back of the pickup, drinking beer out of a can in a paper sack and listening to country and Western music. But ultimately, if Ann Richards does win, and we don't know whether she will or not, women in Texas could make the difference, I gather.
No question about it. As you know, Bubba got a bad name in this election, too. And in the last polls before the election, it was clear in the undecided ranks that most of the undecided were women. Most came from districts where Ann Richards was running strongest. And the gender gap continued to widen over the last 3 weeks of the campaign. It definitely hurt Clayton Williams whether he wins or loses.
All right, thanks very much. Jim Cummins in Texas tonight, where we continue to have a very dramatic race after a long and exhausting campaign costing more than $21 million between these two. Clayton Williams was able to write a check for $8 million for his share of his campaign. But then he's worth about $150 million, and he's so proud of his Texas Aggie roots, Texas A&M, that a swimming pool at one of his ranches is in the shape of the Texas A&M boot. We'll be back after this from your local station.
We're just trying to bring up a feed on the satellite. Should be right on the clock.
Channel 4's Project Earth, brought to you by Shoney's for the family.
3:30 p.m. It was a sunny afternoon. I was working day watch in the forestry division. My name's Earth Day. I heard a noise outside.
Excuse me, sir. I'm Officer Earth Day with Planet Police.
Planet Police?
I'm aware that trees have many good uses, but have you considered planting a tree for each one you cut down?
Planting?
Yes, sir. Trees and forests provide homes for wildlife. They also absorb much of the air pollution. But if we continue destroying trees and forests, the animals will have no home, and we're all in trouble.
I see.
There are nature and forestry groups, as well as gardening centers with information on getting trees and planting them.
Thanks, officer.
Plant a tree. We'll all breathe easier, and those are the facts.
Channel 4's Project Earth, brought to you by Shoney's for the family.
It's Salute America Month on The Ralph Emery Show. Watch in November for special family greetings to those serving our country in the Middle East.
And we hope you're doing okay. Come back soon.
Watch and see how you can assist service families or lift the spirits of a soldier with a letter from home. Plus, look for special guests and videos all month long to honor those who serve and their families. So be sure to watch The Ralph Emery Show for Salute America Month each weekday in November on Channel 4.
We're back with campaign night 1990, and by my lights at least, no election night is ever dull, and we have a lot of races around the country that are simply too close to call. Now, sometime after the polls have closed in those states, and we want to begin in the state of Minnesota, where they have had a walk on the wild side, as it has been called this autumn. Rudy Perpich is the Democratic incumbent governor. He's not a very popular figure out there, but there was chaos on the Republican side. This man, Arnie Carlson, started off as an independent candidate, and then in the last 2 weeks got the Republican mantle, and that one's in a dead heat. It is too close to call in Minnesota tonight. In Illinois, same situation. 40% of the vote has been counted. John Edgar and Neil Hartigan vying for the seat that has been held by Republican Jim Thompson for the last 4 years. Again, too close to call. In Massachusetts, the shootout between William Weld and John Silber. We simply think at this time that the patterns are not yet clear. We cannot determine who will be our projected winner in Massachusetts tonight. In Nebraska, Kay Orr, the one-term Republican governor out there, a woman in a very, very tight race against Mr. Nelson, who is a millionaire businessman, and she's had a little problem with taxes in the state of Nebraska. A lot of people are not happy with her. We'll see what happens there before the night is out. In the state of Maine, these guys, McKernan and Brennan, they've been trading jobs in effect. Brennan's been in Congress after having left the governor's office. Now he wants his old job back. McKernan is the first-term Republican governor of Maine. He'd been in Congress before that, and we don't know what's going to happen there yet. About 1/5 of the vote has been counted. Brennan has a fairly sizable lead, but that could change before the night is out. Down in Texas, we've been talking about that a lot tonight, and we will continue to. This is the race for the big stakes, not just the state of Texas, but it is the president's home state, and he personally went down there and worked the phone banks for Clayton Williams, but more than half of the vote has been counted thus far, and Ann Richards continues to hang on to that 4-point lead, but whether or not she'll be able to sustain that through the evening, we simply cannot say at this hour. In California, the big other race out west, just a few votes in so far, about 200 altogether, as a matter of fact, Feinstein and Wilson. She's from San Francisco and a graduate of Stanford and ran the city of San Francisco as the mayor. He's from San Diego and ran that city as well. He's a Republican and a graduate of Princeton. So it's he, she, North, South, Stanford, Princeton, and all the other contrasts that you can think about. In California, by the way, they have a 221-page ballot this year as well, which is as large as some city phone books and not quite as exciting. NBC's Gary Gutley is in California tonight. Gary, what are they saying at the Feinstein headquarters? She did seem to be in some trouble in the closing days of the campaign. Did they bounce back?
Well, they're not quite sure. She was trailing going into the last 2 or 3 days of the campaign, but the signs we're getting now that this is going to be a very, very close race. And that means it may be a very, very late night in terms of counting the ballots. 20% of the ballots in this election, the gubernatorial race, that's about 500,000 ballots, are absentee ballots. So if it's that close, it may be into the morning hours or even later before a final decision is actually reached. What we do know is that Feinstein was hoping for a large turnout, and she's getting a pretty good one. Almost 60% of the voters in California are going to the polls. A heavy turnout in the northern part of the state around San Francisco, that's Feinstein territory. A lower than expected or average turnout in Orange County in the southern part of the state. That should be Pete Wilson country. So the forecast is going to be for a long evening and a very tight race.
And Garrick, what about the idea of reapportionment in California? If in fact it is Pete Wilson, it will just be blood on the streets of Sacramento, because the state legislature is run by Willie Brown, after all, who is one of the most combative and clever state legislators in the country.
Well, California is the most populous state, has the largest contingent in Congress of 45 seats in the House of Representatives. According to the latest census, they're going to get 7 more seats, so that battle is going to be crucial. And of course, if Pete Wilson does win, he as a Republican governor will be able to appoint his successor in the U.S. Senate, keeping that Senate seat in Republican hands at least until the election in 1992. And as you know, there are also a number of propositions out here. 2 of them, indeed, are dealing with limiting the terms of state legislators. And many people think at least one of these propositions is going to pass. That's another echo of the popular political sentiment here in California, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Garrick Utley. Proposition 140, which would be a very severe limitation on terms in California, means that you could only spend X amount of time in the state assembly, X amount of time in the state senate, and never run for those seats again. It would also cut in half the staffs and take away a lot of the pensions of the state legislators in California. So that's one more demonstration of a lot of the voter anxiety that exists in the land tonight. Let's go back down to Washington now, if we can, to Ed Rollins, who runs the Republican congressional campaigns, and Ron Brown, who is the Democratic national chairman. Mr. Brown, what about that whole business of term limits? Doing well in Colorado, Oklahoma, California is taking hold as well. It's a pox on your profession, it looks like.
Well, I don't know how it's going to come out. It has some attractiveness to voters, evidently, but I think there's some real questions to be asked about it. It seems to me that a lot of voters are going to want to vote for who they want to vote for, and not going to want to have people eliminated who might have been very good legislators. I think it's a little too early to make that call, but I feel very good about the evening. I've never seen the Democratic Party stronger or more unified, certainly in a generation, and the Republican Party seems to be coming apart at the seams. All the conversations are about who's going to be fired at the White House, who's going to be fired at the RNC. Yes.
I gather you feel that way because you come back to the same theme every time we come to you. But let me ask you another question, if I may. This whole business of how much money is spent in American politics these days. The candidates for Congress and the Senate spent about $177 million to the challengers, just a fraction of that. Isn't it time for the political system and those people like you and Ed Rollins and others to take the lead in doing something about campaign finance?
Absolutely. We've got to have campaign finance, and there are 2 principles in campaign finance reform. There have to be limits on contributions and limits on expenditures and full disclosure. Democrats want that. Republicans don't want limits on expenditures. They want to be able to keep running up with truckloads of money and pouring them into these races. We've got to get money out of politics to the extent that it's there. Democrats favor strong, effective campaign finance reform.
Mr. Rollins, what about that? Do you think that the Republicans will get on that bandwagon, given what has happened here tonight?
Obviously, Democrats favor a status quo where incumbents have a built-in advantage with special interest money. And when you go through these races, you'll find every single incumbent has outspent every single challenger anywhere from 2 or 3 to 1. Obviously, we'd like to level the playing field, but I don't think you want to use public financing, and I don't think you necessarily want to violate freedom of speech by putting campaign expenditure limits. I think there's lots of things that you can do. There's some highlights that are coming out tonight that obviously you're not talking about. The first black Republican since 1934 has been elected in the state of Connecticut, Gary Franks. Another black Republican in the city of Cincinnati is leading there, and we think we have an excellent opportunity of having our own black caucus, and I think this is a real tribute to the outreach effort of our national chairman, Lee Atwater.
What does it do to 1992, though, Ed Rollins, in terms of the presidential campaign? It does look like, just about 6 weeks ago, George Bush seemed to be unassailable, especially after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. Now there are real vulnerabilities. I know it's not easy for you to sit on national television and talk about your own president, but the fact of the matter is we have a horse race developing again, don't we?
Well, it depends on who the Democrats put up. If they want to put up a Mario Cuomo or another Northeast liberal, as they traditionally have, come on, we'd be more than happy to go at it. I think realistically, when you look back on the history, 1983, Ronald Reagan trailed 3 Democrats that entire year, won 49 states in 1984. George Bush obviously has had a little setback in the polls, but he's still the most popular president going into midterm elections in modern times, and I think has a tremendous opportunity to get ready for 92 with strong leadership the next 2 years.
All right, thank you very much, Ed Rollins and Ron Brown, who are our resident experts here tonight, as well they should be. One leading the Democratic National Committee, the other one running the congressional campaigns for the Republicans in the House of Representatives. There are some interesting propositions around the country. In Nevada, they've been voting on abortion, and that seems to be passing tonight in Nevada. Regulating abortion, yes, they want to do that in the state of Nevada. That was question number 7 on the Nevada ballot. In Massachusetts, should we roll back the tax hikes that have been put in effect in the last several years? And that went down by a surprisingly large margin. In Colorado, along with Oklahoma and California, they had something on the ballot about limiting the terms of politicians, and in Colorado, they are voting that yes. That's the... We want to take a look now at what happened to some of the people who are described as presidential timber. Some are still standing tall tonight. Some have been nicked up a little bit. Mario Cuomo, re-elected governor of Massachusetts, but by a smaller margin than he won last time. Bill Bradley was in a very tight race tonight. That'll get a lot of analysis tomorrow by the Monday morning political quarterbacks in the country. Sam Nunn plainly is interested in 1992. He was unopposed in Georgia, so he had nothing to worry about on this election night. It's a question of where he goes from here, of course. Al Gore of Tennessee, re-elected tonight. Richard Gephardt, the Democratic congressman from Missouri, in good shape in his district. Jesse Jackson running for the Shadow Senate out of Washington, D.C. That's why you're not seeing him on any television programs in Washington tonight. He'll be campaigning hard for statehood for the District of Columbia, and he'll also be campaigning hard for Jesse Jackson as a national player. By the way, Marion Barry defeated in his race for a city council seat at large in Washington, D.C., and Sharon Pratt Dixon, the woman who was running for mayor of Washington, D.C. after all the scandal about Marion Barry, elected tonight in Washington, D.C.
And Tom, let me just sneak in here that Newt Gingrich is still fighting it out with that fella down in Georgia. With 61% of the vote in, it's 50-50 now in percentages with Newt Gingrich against David Worley. I guess he never thought he'd be in a tough one like that.
I would think that that's one maybe that the President of the United States sitting in front of his television set might be turning to Barbara and saying, makes me feel real bad that Newt Gingrich is not doing well, even though he's a member of our party.
Well, I think you may find that in the mansion tonight, that they're feeling that. We're not predicting that Newt Gingrich is going to lose, but this is a really remarkable thing with 2/3 of the vote in, and it's still 50-50.
Well, John, what do you make about what we're seeing across the country tonight? I guess the one pattern that I had picked up was that if you have a state that's in trouble economically, like Mike Dukakis in Massachusetts and DePrett in Rhode Island and so on, you're going to be in trouble if you're a politician. If you've raised taxes in the last couple of years as a governor, or if you voted for him as a senator, people just don't like that, despite all the polls that say, raise our taxes if it helps the country.
But it's very bad news for the country, this tax revolt, that with the evidence that we've seen of it tonight, because if this, as the president put it, if we don't start handling the deficit, we are really in the soup. That's what started all this political ruckus this year. The other thing, Tom, that strikes me is the Childs campaign, the limit on contributions when he running for governor of Florida and winning, the low-key kind of civilized attitude. When the Republicans were holding $1,500 a plate fundraisers down there, he was having a $1.50 hot dog lunch. I think people are going to pay a lot of attention to what Lawton Childs did.
All right, thank you very much, John Chancellor.
Tom?
That's where we stand at this hour on Election Night 1990. I should remind you that we'll be back here at 11:30 tonight Eastern Time with more late results, including Texas and California, we hope. We'll see you then.
Thursday, little Rudy's growing up.
Another Huxtable woman.